Okay, good afternoon, everyone. For those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Rich Heisenbottle. I'm an architect in town. I'm a fellow of the American Institute of Architects, and I hold a silver medal for design from AIA Miami. And the Playhouse has been one of my passions since, in my mind, it became an endangered building. Dade Heritage Trust still has it on the endangered list, I believe, and so does the Florida Trust for Historic Preservation. There's been a lot of controversy that has surrounded the building as to how to restore it and what is the right way to restore it. And so that controversy has led to it being, frankly, abandoned now for more years than any of us want to even count. Probably 2006, if I remember correctly, when it actually closed. The question that the community was faced with was how to reinvigorate the theater after it went bankrupt because a couple of things happened. A new group of board members, they asked to acquire the property. The state of Florida was glad to give it to them because we're paying for this. You want to take care of it? Okay. And ultimately, they were unsuccessful in everything that they tried to do and filed for bankruptcy. But prior to this theater closing, it used to pack people into Coconut Grove. You would have many a night of a full theater, sending people out to the shops, out to the restaurants, walking around after the theater, having dinner before the theater. Now the theater has gone bankrupt, and the challenge is what to do with it. How do we resurrect it? And one of the good things that happened was that the county arranged, along with FIU, to lease the building from the state of Florida. That was a very positive time. Everyone felt very good about the fact that, well, it's now under our control, it's not Tallahassee's control, and we'll get something done. But the county took the lead in moving the potential project forward. And the county hired Arquitectonica, along with preservation architect George Hernandez, to come up with a plan for how to go forward with the building. And the county had also appropriated $20 million in round numbers, general obligation bond funds, to restore the building. Something that we all voted on. The general obligation bond funds are things that all of us are registered voters got to vote on, and this was one of the products that was listed as the restoration of Coconut Grove Playhouse. So as the project took a very, very long time to progress, finally Arquitectonica was hired, and we found out at that time, to the surprise of many in the community, that the program that the county had written for this was centered around saving only the front facade and demolishing virtually everything behind it, although they'll tell you they're demolishing what they call the front building. There is no front building and back building, there's just the building. The design was to create a space between the front of the building and a new theater that is built in the back. The problem that many of us had with that notion is because it was really a demolition project. And from a theatrical perspective, from the theater perspective, we've got a 1,100 seat theater today. We had a theater that was probably 700 seats, 600 seats in its original iteration before that balcony came in. And now you're giving us a 300 seat theater. A 300 seat theater does not have an economic impact on the merchants of Coconut Grove. They're not going to fill those restaurants. They're not going to fill the shops. It's not going to bring in the kind of plays that we used to have that went from here to Broadway on a regular basis. The Broadway of the South, as this theater was once nicknamed. So it became a very controversial thing. In fact, it got more controversial as we started to uncover the fact that the county really wasn't going to spend its money on the Playhouse itself, or the restoration of the Playhouse, that $20 million that we had put together out of GO bond money. They were going to build more retail shops, more offices, and lease those with 30% of a project that was theatrical in nature, with no educational components to it, and 70% of the project which was retail shops. That got many members of the community very upset. Some retail shops made sense because there was some retail here on the ground floor back in the day. But to convert 70% of the project to retail and virtually leave only 300 seats to a theater made no sense to a lot of people. This was just, to many, desecration of the original grove. And in any event, as a result of that, there were very significant protests that occurred at City Hall. It was quite a protest here in the streets with 300 or 400 people out here.
It opened January the 1st, 1927. The building needs to be restored, the theater needs to be open, and it's time to take it back.
In any event, the project came before, as all historic preservation projects do in the city, it came before the city's Historic Preservation Board. That came before them once, and the board said we need to see more information. The architectonica drawings were not complete. They were really nothing more than a concept, and they said, conceivably we could approve this, but we need to see all the detail before you really have our final approval. The county proceeded forward with the 300-seat design and the retail shops and office design, and the parking authorities to build a new garage right next door, and the Grove could use the garage. The outcome of that was that they took the final drawings back to the Historic Preservation Board for approval, and the Historic Preservation Board turned them down, which set in motion a series of lawsuits. An appeal, first of all, to the City Commission. The City Commission can overturn a ruling of the Historic Preservation Board. Ultimately, it did not overturn the Preservation Board. The county appealed it to the local circuit court, sent it back. It was heard another time by the City Commission, who approved it, and then Mayor Suarez, with the veto power he has, provided it's not some unanimous vote, he had the right to cast his own vote and veto the commission's approval. So he came out here one day and announced that he was really a great supporter of preservation, felt that what was being done was totally wrong for the community and wrong for the theater, and he vetoed it, which sent another set of lawsuits, first to the circuit court, who said, the second time around, we're not going to hear this. We think this needs to go to the 3rd District Court of Appeals. They questioned their authority to hear the issue of the mayor's veto. So the county then takes it to the 3rd District Court of Appeals. And every time this happens, years go by. So the 3rd District Court finally heard it just last month. And the 3rd District Court says, no, local district court, you should have heard this case. It's not for us to hear, it's for you to hear. So now they've turned around and they've sent the case back down to the lower court to be heard again. So all of this is this fighting between the city administration and the county administration has left us with a deteriorating building as a community. Nothing that we can show for economic impact on Coconut Grove, nothing that we can show for the $20 million that we propose to use from our general obligation bond money, nothing that we can show for historic preservation, and the argument still continues. So your challenge, I guess, this year, for you guys to come up with, what would you propose for the theater? How would you handle this project? Now, what we have in yellow, that's the core of this building. That's 1926. That's what we need. So that allows us to keep the center section, the core of the historic building, the 600-seat theater, and to put the support space on either side of it. We build a new stage house in the back, a stage house that is about 80 or 90 feet wide. All of the support space off on our left side over here, which actually has all of the dressing rooms, the costume shop, and the things that are necessary, the storage spaces that are necessary for modern theater. And it also gave us room on the far corner to add a second theater, a 200-seat studio theater. And the purpose of that studio theater is that certain plays are of the right nature, of the right size, and the right audience. They work well. Other work, but are things that folks artistically would enjoy supporting and exploring, belong in a smaller 200-seat studio theater. And so on the other side of the building, we proposed a studio theater. Not as ornate, very open. That allows a different kind of use and a different kind of art to go on its stage. And then the third thing that we did is what happens with the front of the garage. We said to ourselves that the front of the garage instead of being retail shops, could very easily be a conservatory for training. We're standing in the back over here right now where the garage would be, but you wouldn't really want the garage facing your nice Main Street. So what we proposed was a conservatory that had flexible training rooms that we could teach just about anything in. We could have yoga in there, or we could have modern dance, or we could have drama. But what's important here is what's going on up top in the conservatory. It's the education that's important. You know, we even toyed with the idea of having the Sidney Poitier Center for Film Studies. There's a very good structural engineer in town, Douglas Wood and Associates, and Douglas is one of the foremost structural engineers that has a lot of experience in historic preservation. And there are lots of problems with that structure, make no mistake about it. But Doug has done a very complete and thorough documentation of the structure, tested the concrete, understood where the cracks are, and the long and short of it is Douglas says that we can restore this building. It's not beyond salvage, and Doug's report confirmed that. The county allowed a number of folks from the community in so they could see the condition of the building and see how bad a condition the building was in. The reason it's in that kind of condition is because the county hasn't done one thing to keep the water out, to keep the vagrants out, since they took control of the building. They left it in that condition so that they would have no trouble tearing it down when they went to the preservation board and said, look, it's in terrible condition. Yes, there's mold and mildew here, but if you've actually kept a roof on the building or properly or removed those elements and stripped it down to got rid of the old carpets, we might find that the building is not nearly in as bad a condition as it seems. What you're seeing here, Richard, are additions that were put on the building over the years that provided support space, but are not historically significant. Those are additions that can be removed without compromising the building's National Register status. And the short part in the back is exactly what I'm talking about. We need to put back there a new stage house that has all the bells and whistles and structural capacities for new rigging systems and new sound systems and new lighting systems to make that stage really work well. I think we should go back and know a little bit about the history of the building from its early days. The building was built in 1926 as a Paramount Theater. And it was a design of Keenel and Elliott, because Keenel and Elliott was one of the foremost firms in Florida in the boom of the 1920s. They are the primary firm that gave us what we often call Mediterranean Revival architecture. Some of us disagree with calling it Mediterranean Revival because it was never a Mediterranean style, and if there wasn't a Mediterranean style, how can you have a revival? But nonetheless, it is that architecture that you all know is a blend of Italian and Spain characteristics blended together to create some of our most famous buildings of the 1920s. So Keenel and Elliott, they're on the top of the list of architects. They had an amazing firm, did all the large projects back in the day. The theater did not last long as a movie theater. It was a vaudeville house in the very beginning. Vaudeville was on the way out by about 1926, but they still had built a stage house that was capable of having vaudeville acts, and the theater was a single level. Today, it has a balcony in it, and in its last iteration, the theater sat about 1,100 people. The theater morphed into a playhouse, and the playhouse was rather successful, kind of reinvented in a very different way in the 1950s. Between 1950 and 1955, there are two major additions that occur at the Playhouse. Alfred Browning Parker, that other architect, that other actually very famous Miami architect, famous mostly for his residential designs, but Al did a major renovation to the theater in the 1950s. Shortly after that, a couple of years later, that balcony was added. The balcony is a strange little thing because the balcony is very, very tight underneath and very, very tight up above. It was kind of forced in the back of the room to get extra people in the theater. Whether I like the balcony or not, and I don't, as you can tell, it didn't belong there in the beginning. It shouldn't have been jammed in there, and it should go out now. Al Parker left the room, the main hall, the theater itself, in the same shape that it was in when he took it over. The original proscenium arch is in the theater. You're going to see that it is a very ornate, plaster, kind of double-throated arch that is quite exciting. Some of the columns that were in the theater, these twisted columns we see outside the building, Those, you're going to find those same sorts of twisted columns with the classical capitals inside the theater in different styles, and in other ornate, low relief plaster elements that make it a pretty unique space inside the theater. That's what survived. The rest of Al Parker's design, for the most part, is no longer there. But I would tell you that the bones of the Keenel and Elliott building are still here. They're here on the outside. You can see them yourself. You see the finials and the twisted columns that we were talking about before, balusters, all of those characteristics of Mediterranean revival or Mediterranean style architecture are here in the building. Okay, well, thank you all very much for your attention, and I wish you the absolute best in your class. And like I said, once again, have fun. See you later.
Thank you.
All right, my pleasure. Good.